I'm going to hit the record button and I'll share my screen. You should all now see my screen. And let's see, I should get it to go full screen. There we go.
What was it? What was it? Where was it? No, people should.
As a photographer, I've been shooting weddings for years. I've shot couples from different backgrounds, different ages, different perspectives. I mean, given I'm just a photographer, I'm not a priest or a philosopher or some kind of minister or something. You'd think I'd be able to see it. I'd be able to figure it out, what adds up to a successful marriage, which ones are going to make it and which ones aren't. But I can't. When I meet a couple, they're happy. They're in love. Call me an easy sell, but I believe them. I'm optimistic. I look at them, I say to myself, these kids got it. This is gonna last. I couldn't possibly question it. The truth is, I have no idea. So you meet two people who do pull it off, and they stay together. You ask yourself, how do they do that? What's the formula? What are the ingredients to something like that?
I want you to imagine a view of the Earth from outer space, looking down upon this gorgeous blue and green planet, and zooming down specifically, let's say to North America, with their beautiful coastlines and the breathtaking wilderness and the canyons and the valleys and the lakes. And imagine now, eons after all of this was created in its original glory, that mankind and governments moved in and started drawing lines in the sand. Now, this is where Canada is going to start, and Mexico is going to be over here, and Kansas and Utah, and drawing all these lines and boundaries and definitions. In a certain sense, this is a fitting metaphor for marriage, something that had been created by God at the very beginning. And then eons later, governments have shown up and made rules and regulations. Now, this is how the contract would work, and this is how prenuptial agreements work, and child custody laws. And sometimes, in the midst of all these rules and regulations, we lose sight of the beautiful creation that preceded all of man's regulations having to do with it. What we need to realize is just like North America as a landmass existed long before governments, so too did marriage itself exist as an institution because it was created by God long before the government had any laws and rules and regulations about it. But sometimes we need to put aside all of our preconceived ideas and expectations and notions of marriage from a legal perspective to step back and open our hearts to perhaps what God's original plan is for man and woman.
We all want to find happiness in marriage, but we're not always sure how. After all, marriage isn't always valued or understood or appreciated in our world. But what if marriage is more than a simple contract between two people? What if it's more than romance, mutual fulfillment, and attraction? What if woven into the very design of your humanity is a purposeful desire for you to be united with your beloved? To create something new together, something mysterious and holy? What if your marriage is designed to be a vital part of God's work in the world? As we begin this journey through God's plan for marriage, we're going to see that through the sacrament of matrimony, your love story is drawn ever more into the greatest love story of all, God's own love for us. And it's only in that love and living according to that plan God has for our love that we will find the happiness we long for in marriage.
About Julie when we met that I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with.
It was funny. We met at a conference. A friend introduced us. I never thought I would actually see her again, but I fell in love on the spot.
I think in the last month especially, we've said multiple times together, like, I like you. Like, I like being married to you. This is so nice.
And I remember looking at him thinking, this is just a conversation between friends, just a conversation between friends. And I was like, oh no, he's really cute. Oh no. Conversation between friends. Dios nos había creado en su infinito amor para vivir esta vida juntos. Y era Jorge y yo desde toda la eternidad. It was so obvious to me that, wow, this guy's fantastic. I really hope I see this guy again. I'd really like to get to know him more.
I got to know Greg more than I ever knew any other person I've ever even known, even more than friends. I just enjoyed hanging out with him.
Everything that I ever did never warranted the wonderful gift of matrimony.
When we discovered that there was something much greater than the two of us, our marriage became honeymoonal. And it remains honeymoonal. There's a joy, there's a desire to be together.
So you look at our life and you look at how we couldn't wait to not see each other. And now it's like I'll be gone to the grocery store and I can't wait to get home and be with them.
I think we had a reasonably good marriage for our first 25 years. I think we've had a really good marriage now that the Lord is front and center in our lives. It's changed everything for us.
It's not because you're worthy. It's because it's a gift. It's a flood of joy. In the midst of sorrow, a flood of joy.
When you think about it for what it is, how beautiful is that? That this God of all creation has called us to be together in this relationship to exemplify his love. And so much so that the responsibility we have is allowing each other to grow closer to him so that they can one day spend eternity in heaven with God. Wow.
There is perhaps no other word in the English language, or any language for that matter, that's so misunderstood and so often misused as the word love. Suppose the only education somebody had about the subject of love, the only education was from their radio. What would they learn about this thing that they're not sure what it is? Now that's a very interesting question, isn't it? Because if you were to listen to the radio, maybe every, third song would probably include the word love, maybe? And what is it we mean when we say love? What do we think love is? We get all these mixed ideas about love. What is it on earth we're talking about? Well, they might learn that it's in the air, right? Love is in the air. They might learn that this thing that's in the air is all you need. They might learn that apparently this thing that they need, which is in the air, stinks. Apparently, love stinks, right? And they might also learn, what's it got to do with it? What's love got to do with it anyway? They would have a very confused understanding about this thing. But thankfully, God has placed within our hearts a yearning, burning, longing desire for a real love. It seems to me deep within our hearts, we kind of get it. And see, this is the one thing no one can complain about. If I tell you, you desire love, right? You can't say, don't try and box me in. You don't know me, right? Because we all just, we desire to be loved and we desire to love. There's no one out there saying, actually, I'm quite different. I'd rather be rejected and discarded all the days of my life and end up living in a one-bedroom apartment with 13 cats. None of us say that. There still remains within the human heart a desire for a love that is permanent and exclusive. And I think if any of us are honest, we would say that is the kind of love that we ultimately want.
One of the most romantic places that I've ever been is Paris, France. You know, and in Paris, they seem to have a corner on love, right? I mean, you see these sweet young couples kissing in front of the Eiffel Tower. You see couples outside of a French bistro having a glass of wine. I mean, the romance is just, it's in the air. It's everywhere. And you just get so excited about love itself, even if you just go by yourself. Paris just draws us into this place where we want to experience something romantic. There's actually this bridge in Paris where couples go and they bring with them a lock, something like this, right? And they'll take this lock and they'll attach it to the bridge and they'll even take out the key and throw it over the bridge into the water. You know, it's this symbol of their undying love for one another. And that really speaks to me because we have this universal longing for love, right? I mean, people come all over the world to this bridge in Paris. It just makes me think that, you know, we all want love. We want to give love, we want to receive love, but not just any kind of love. It's a particular kind of love that we want. You know, it's something engraved in our hearts. When it comes down to it, we want a love that is forever, right? We want a love that will last. And not because the church says so, because it's been written upon our hearts. It's something that we want to give, we want to receive back. We want to give everything for that one person and that person to do the same in return. That's the type of love we're actually made for. It's just a part of being a human, right? It's how we've been created, is to give an everlasting love and to receive an everlasting love.
When a marriage is permanent, it brings a relationship to a whole new level. A man and woman can experience a much deeper, a more profound love. You see, when we don't have that lifelong commitment in a relationship, deep down we know that the other person isn't really committed to us as a person. They're just committed to what they may get out of us. We may enjoy a lot of fun times together, but they're really more committed to those fun times or feelings or companionship or pleasure, but they're not really committed to me. And what happens when things get difficult in my life? Will this other person really be there for me in good times and in bad? And health and in sickness, when things don't go well? Will they be there for me when I'm not as beautiful as I used to be, or I'm not as successful as I used to be, or I'm not meeting this other person's expectations anymore?
So the idea of marriage, it was a little daunting because it's forever. I mean, marriage is permanent. I mean, think about it in your life. How many things do you really get involved in that are forever, right? I mean, for me, before I got married, the longest commitment I had was to my cell phone carrier.
I think we all need security. If we know that we're entering a relationship, a union, that we're not in for the long haul, guess what? We're all building our life rafts. We need the emotional and intellectual and psychological security of indissolubility in order to be all in. And if a marriage is blessed with children, that's also something the kids need. The kids need that stability. The children need to know that mom and dad are going to love each other no matter what, that union is going to be there.
Without that lifelong commitment, I really live in insecurity, in a certain fear, and I have to constantly be protecting myself. And when that's at the heart of a relationship, I'm not really going to be vulnerable with this other person. I'm not going to let them really see me truly as I am. To see my weakness, my fears, the dark parts of my life, and that kind of self-protection, that kind of insecurity, really hinders the kind of unity and love that God wants us to have in a marriage.
We all want permanent love that lasts, and that's only found in marriage. That is why marriage is so important. We have been called for this relationship, for this type of love. We are called to be in the commitment of love. We have been made for love.
Sometimes when I'm working, a moment pops out, an image, and it just hits me out of nowhere, and just one among all the others, and there it is, proof. Man, look at that smile. You can't fake something like that. That's the smile of someone in love. This is what we want. This is what we're made for. We're made for love.
One Wednesday, I come home, he greets me at the door, and he said, I am so tired. I said, I am too. I can't wait to go to bed in my own home. He said, no, you don't get it. I'm emotionally tired. I am done. I think we need to get a divorce. He said the word, and I agreed immediately. I mean, that's how we were living our lives. We were separate. You know, we had a house together. We had children together. But spiritually, we had nothing in common. We had grown so far apart because we had no clue what marriage was supposed to be. So we decided to do what we thought then was the best thing. We called our two kids into the room, 7 and 9 years old. Said, Lauren and Christopher, you know, mom and dad just want to share something with you. Sometimes we're not meant to be together, and we are going to get a divorce. And regardless of the fact that they were huddled in the corner, holding each other, their bodies were shaking from the mere fact that we were ripping their lives apart. But we justified, because we were so miserable that when they grow up, we'll just send them to counseling, they'll be fine.
16 years ago, Julie and I found ourselves on the brink of divorce, and it was a result of us beginning to buy into the ways and lies of society. And we fell prey to those things, those different messages that did take us away. And the beauty in all this is that our church does have these beautiful teachings, but for us, and for whatever reason, we never received them. It wasn't there for us in marriage prep. My parents never gave it to us. We didn't hear it in the homily. And so what we had resorted to was that what the world had to say is what marriage was all about. And so that's the prescription we subscribe to, and that is the life that we begin to lead. And it is a life that is full of disaster, because everything the world has to say is that it's all about you. Find the love you want, the love that you want to keep, what makes you happy. And even as we're growing up, where do you want to go to school? What do you want to study? Where do you want to live? Who do you want to marry? How many kids do you want to have? And so everything that we learn in the world is all about us and what we want. And in kind of a twisted kind of way, those things became our God, because everything we said and did evolved around how we're going to get more stuff, how we're going to do more things. And when we could no longer find that happiness in other things, unfortunately, we began to look for it in other people. So infidelity became a big part of a marriage relationship. And so Julie made an appointment to see the tribunal vicar for the diocese.
And we went in to tell him for 45 minutes. We spilled our guts to him as to everything that we did wrong.
He did this, she did that, the whole infidelity. I mean, just literally everything. We just vomited upon this poor priest. And it was almost as if he was at a tennis match, just watching us volley the blame back and forth. And he was awesome. He didn't say a word. He just sat there and listened to us. But as we were done, he leaned forward. He said, look, guys, I understand your plight and your situation, but let me ask you a few questions. What is God's plan for marriage? What does our church teach about the sacrament of marriage? What are some of the writings of St. Paul and the various holy fathers pertaining to the sacrament of marriage? And Julie and I looked at each other dumbfounded, shrugged our shoulders. We don't know, Father. We're Catholic. We go to church every Sunday. We used to be in love, and now we're not. And we were simply hoping that you can show us how to get out of this. And he said, well, what I suggest is that you go home and find some answers to the questions that I've asked before you make a final decision.
And thanks be to God. Greg did.
So I went home and didn't even know where the Bible was, but eventually found it and kind of dusted off. And in the 2 days of being home, didn't go to work or anything, just reading and absorbing this information.
The moment that he called me into the room and said, let me share with you what our church teaches about the sacrament of marriage. And he began to share with me. And then he moved on to God's plan. And my heart was on fire. And at that moment, I knew we had done it all wrong. The grace I felt was instant, because at that moment, I wanted nothing more than to have an amazing and a wonderful marriage with this man. I know without a doubt that I am not perfect. I know he knows I'm not perfect, and yet he still chooses to love me. That is the gift.
Marriage isn't just a social convention. It's not a piece of paper, not a contract. It's the very thing we were made for. It's hardwired into us. It's the very reason we were made male and female.
Marriage is good for us. Marriage makes us happier. If we live a good marriage, we're going to have healthier lives. Think of all the different problems we have in society. Gangs, violence. The solution? Good marriage, strong families.
The Catechism tells us that God, who created man out of love, calls man to love and then refers to it as the fundamental and innate vocation of every human being. So it's not really surprising that the sociological evidence, our common experience of matrimony, when lived in accord with God's plan, would fit, would make sense, would be practical for us.
The kind of security that comes from feeling that one is loved in a committed relationship just makes people happier. One survey of 14,000 adults over a 10-year period found that marital status was one of the most important predictors of happiness. Married men and women report less depression, less anxiety, and lower levels of other types of psychological distress than do those who are single, divorced, or widowed. In addition to that increased happiness quotient among marrieds, there are other clear advantages to committed marriage. 2 major national studies conducted in the early and late 90s found that married people enjoy more frequent and better quality sexual experiences than even single people do, and reported greater physical and emotional satisfaction with those experiences. As it turns out, love and commitment greatly heighten sexual pleasure, especially for women. Both men and women who are married enjoy higher incomes than singles. It's a great help, of course, to have 2 salaries and shared living expenses, but those who are married are not just better off because they can share, perhaps because of the stability that marriage encourages, or the sense that one is working for someone else, or perhaps just because of the happiness marriage breeds. married people statistically tend to be better earners. Married couples and their intact families are more likely to be peaceful and less prone to violence than cohabiting situations or even second marriages. It seems that lower levels of commitment tend to raise the chance of violence in the home, and higher levels of commitment tend to lower violence. The advantage of committed marriage even includes enhanced lifespan. Both men and women live longer if they are married than if they are not. For men, staying married boosts the chance of surviving to age 65 from about 2 out of 3 to 9 out of 10. For women, wedlock ups the likelihood of surviving to old age from about 80 to more than 90%.
So we've seen marriage corresponds to our heart's deepest desires for a lasting love. It also just works well. It's good for our lives, for our happiness, and for society. But now we're going to see something more. We're going to see how marriage is bound up with God's very plan for the world.
Imagine being there that day when someone approached Jesus and asked about the questionable marriage practices of his own time. He came with a legal mindset. He wanted to know, what did the law say about marriage? But Jesus went beyond the question of law and had them consider something much more fundamental, something much more important. What did God plan for marriage? He brought them back to the beginning, to the very first book of the Bible. Have you not read that he made them from the beginning male and female, and said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one? And Jesus concluded, so they are no longer two but one. What therefore God has joined, let no man put asunder.
So 2 key things stand out here. 1, God made human beings, male and female. And 2, he did this so that they could become one in marriage.
There are 2 ways that the Bible tells the story of creation. First, the Bible talks about everything that God created, the entire universe, with man and woman created in the image and likeness of God. Then the Bible zooms in on the man and woman in particular, and how they were created to come together as one in marriage. Jesus references both of these points.
So the first creation story describes how God created the sun, the moon, the earth, the stars, the birds and the fish, all the creatures on the earth. But it culminates with the creation of the human person. God made them male and female.
Why does the Bible emphasize that human persons are made male and female? We can look around the world and see that animals are made that way so they can reproduce. But the Bible doesn't mention in the creation account male and female animals, male and female birds, male and female donkeys. But the Bible does go out of its way to highlight that human persons are made male and female. This tells us that God must have some special purpose in mind for making us this way, some special purpose that goes far beyond just reproduction.
That special purpose is the focus of the second creation account. At the climax of that telling, God creates Adam and Eve for each other, for this special purpose of marriage. At the very end of Genesis 2, we read the words, therefore a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife, and the two become one flesh.
So Genesis 1 ends with them 2, male and female. But Genesis 2 ends with them 1, married as husband and wife.
There's a lot here in the Bible, probably a lot more than many of us ever imagined. But we're ready now to get to the heart of the matter. You see, the end of a story is where it all comes together. It's where we discover the purpose of the story. We've seen that the whole trajectory of these creation stories is marriage. At the climax of these accounts, we learn that God made us male and female so that we could be made one in marriage. God's goal for the whole world is achieved when he creates man and woman for each other in marriage.
And so our matrimonial love for each other is intended as a special sign of God's permanent and unfailing love for each human person. God creates the world out of love and with the intention of uniting each soul with himself. And so marriage becomes a special sign of God's love for each one of us.
So we can see that marriage isn't just a way to regulate sexual activity or even just a matter of rights or self-expression or even just a matter of social convention.
In our married love for one another, we participate in something much bigger than the human affections we share or the honest desire to be united to the one we love. As wonderful as those things are, our married love is meant to be drawn up into God's own love.
More than anything else in the entire created world, marriage is a sign of that divine love. This is why our marriages matter. They matter so much. And this is why we want to do all we can to understand the meaning of marriage and understand how we can live more according to God's plan for this sacred union.
I have got to get this right.
All right. Let stop share screen. Manage participants. Okay, everybody should be unmuted at this point. So, so you can see from the video, it's you know, we got to hear from theologians, and we got to hear from Catholic speakers, and we got to hear from couples of all different ages and backgrounds, their opinions and their thought process about why marriage matters. And that's where we're starting in this 6-week series is just getting into the topic of why marriage matters. I'd love to hear, I've got a couple of questions to kind of get the discussion going, but I'd love to hear if anybody has any particular insights or something that stood out to them in the video that they hadn't thought of before, or perhaps it brought you to a reflection or deeper thought process. Anybody have something they want to share that stood out to them?
I think one of the things that stood out to me, Everett, was it highlighted that there was no other commitment we make for a lifetime other than maybe to our Lord, right? So that was it wasn't a new concept, but it was something that I had probably never said out loud.
One of the things that they kept coming back to is, what does the church teach about the sacrament of marriage? And so often they talked around it, right? It's hard to describe what love is or what are the benefits of the sacrament. You can say joy and peace and better income, and they seem to talk around it for the longest time. But they finally got to it to draw our love into the deeper love of God himself. God had a purpose for people, right? If we're made in the image and likeness of God, what is that image and likeness? It is to be able to love as he loves. And only in marriage, I think, can we most deeply do that. And I can't speak for a priest because he's married to the church and how that whole dynamic is, or a nun married to Jesus and how that dynamic is. But it's to teach us to love, or to be a part of the intensity of God's love.
It's good insight. I know that, you know, when they're making a video like this, I actually appreciate that they danced around it for a little while, because it creates a thought process on our end, but it also is, I think, important, because if you have people that are listening that don't have a good understanding of like the relationship between marriage and Christ, and marriage in the church, and his relationship with the church, you know, jumping right into the answer is sometimes not the best approach. That it's healthy to kind of journey with the listener, so they see all the different benefits and thought processes around marriage and different things. We are going to be diving more deeply into the theological content of marriage as we go further in the study. So if it felt a bit thin on the theological, I think that's with good reason. That the goal is to create discussion and really you know, slowly guide us towards the answers, rather than to just give us the answers all up front. Any other thoughts on the video, things that stood out to you? Okay, well, so here's a question for you. If we're hardwired to desire faithful and permanent and exclusive love of marriage, and that was an argument that they made in the beginning, is that we're hardwired, we all want this. Why is it that marriage is so difficult? Because I imagine they painted a beautiful picture of marriage as all of these good things, but I can tell you that my marriage is not always all of those good things. In fact, there have been many long periods of difficult times. So why can marriage be difficult sometimes if we all want the same thing? Perhaps an easier way to put it is, what makes your marriage difficult sometimes?
Well, you answered it yourself. You gave us the answer, because
sorry.
we all want one thing, right? And sometimes what she wants is different than what I want.
Mark, elaborate. What do you, if we all want love, how can our desire for love be manifested differently?
Well, I think just you can say what you're going to say, but when you ask that question, I think how I perceive love, or how I feel love, is different than how he feels love. It's totally different. I think maybe just in general, men and women think of that maybe differently, possibly upbringing, whatever the case is. And I think so I have to figure out what not his love language, because I don't go for that really, but what actually.
There's a lot of grunting in my love language, so I don't know what to say.
Anyway, but I mean, we have to figure out as a married couple how to show each other love, you know, and what love looks like to him may not be what looks like love to me. We're imperfect, you know.
When you use the words love language, is everybody familiar? There's a relatively popular book out called, I think it's the 7 Love Languages or something. And the theory behind it is that every person has a particular language in which they receive love and in which they communicate or give love. And the thought process behind it is that very often married couples don't receive love or communicate love with the same language. And so you have to learn your spouse's love language. For example, like I know my wife, her love language is, what makes her feel loved is quality time. Whereas for me, like acts of service is very much the way in which I communicate love. So I have to be more intentional about understanding and like be more intentional about spending quality time with my wife. And not just like time with my wife, but it's got to be quality time with my wife in order for her to feel loved. Real quick anecdote. I know my daughter, and I know like not everybody's big on the love languages. I think the thought is the same, is that we communicate love in different ways. My daughter, if she has a love language, it's definitely gift giving. She has a thing going on right now. She's 7 years old, and she probably gives away at least 2 gifts a day to somebody. So either it's me or my wife or her brothers. She'll wrap something up, she'll draw something, she'll write something. She has gotten into a habit this week or in the last 2 weeks where she has a friend that's 2 houses down. And so she has been like writing gifts or creating gifts and then going and putting it on the doorstep because they can't spend time with each other as friends. And then she'll ring the doorbell and she'll run away. And then her friend, like a few hours later, will do the same thing and like leave it on our doorstep and run and go away. And they do this like twice or 3 times a day, and the gifts are becoming more and more elaborate to where I think that she's going to give away like all of her toys at this point. But that's the way in which she communicates love, and it's really cute because I'm like I don't know that the other girl understands that this is going to go on forever. My daughter is not going to stop because it's the way that she shows love. So for those of you, I mean, how does your spouse? What makes your spouse feel loved, and what makes you feel loved? Come on, don't be shy. This is an interactive study. Let's get it out there.
I wanted to go back to your first question, right?
Sure.
I've actually been thinking about that a lot. I mean, I've been married for 43 years. And so I keep thinking, and I think that one couple kind of hit it on the head for me, right? Is you sometimes listen to what the world says marriage should be. And that by no means to me is what it should be, because that's not what it is. It really is that commitment. It really is the security of knowing through ups and downs that your spouse is going to be there no matter what. But I find that I am so selfish that maybe I want to remodel my kitchen and my spouse doesn't, right? And so I just harp on this in my mind all the time. Like, why can't he just do this one thing? Or why can't he do this? To the point where like, this is really making me mad. And, you know, do I really need to put up with this crap? Really? Like, do I really need that, right? But then at the end of the day, I say to myself, really? That's why you would like discard your spouse of 43 years because he doesn't want a new countertop? That is like, it's just so self-centering to me. And so I like back down and say, don't be stupid, don't be dumb. Those are material things. So, I just think about that all the time, and it's kind of crazy. I don't know.
No, it's good insight. One priest when I was seeking advice when I was getting married, I shouldn't say, no, it wasn't a priest, it was a friend of mine, and he asked his best man on his wedding day, who had been married for several years. He said, what's the best wedding advice or marriage advice you could give me today on my wedding day? And he said, there'll come a day when all you have is your commitment to your commitment. And he's like, just make sure you keep that commitment. And he was like, well, that's really somber, like somewhat depressing advice. But he was like, no, here's what I'm getting at. He says, look, we don't need a vow or a commitment to love in the good times and in health and in wealth and richness and in, and like, we don't need a commitment for that. We make the vow and we make the commitment for the bad times and the sickness and the poverty and like, you make the commitment in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life. Because those bad times will come, whether it's something like remodeling your kitchen, which is stressful, or just a disagreement over it, or whether it's sickness and illness and or tragedy, or whatever the case may be. Like, the bad times do come, and that's why you have a partner, is so that you know that your partner is with you and will love you even when it's hard to do so.
And I think the other thing for me is the differences in the way that my spouse was brought up and the way that I was brought up. And kind of what I think love is, because that's what I grew up with. What he thinks love is, because that's what he grew up with. And really trying to accept each other for who we are, not who I want him to be. I had to learn to accept him, because when I met him, and I've said this to my son before too, when you met this person, they're the same as they are today. Don't expect them to be different. And that's what I had to learn, is to accept my spouse for who he is, and not change him. Like, that's not who I married. The person I want him to change into isn't the person I married. So I have to, I think there's a balance, there's give and take and all of that. But the big takeaway for me was, why am I marrying this person, the person I fell in love with, that I loved? Why do I want him to change? Like, it didn't make sense. But, day-to-day life changes people, but we don't change.
Yep.
We don't change. I don't think we do. We might a little bit. Your core self, your beliefs, the way that you were brought up, they're always going to be there. So.
I want to keep opening up the floor, because we've had some people who haven't had a chance to share. Perhaps they don't want to share, they're just enjoying listening, and that's okay too. But if what makes marriage difficult is the question that we're answering. If anybody, I have another follow-up question, but if somebody else wants to chime in on that, what makes marriage so challenging if we all want love, and that's what we're in it for. If somebody else wants to chime in, by all means, jump into the conversation.
Basically, we're two different people with two different sets of ideas, and sometimes those ideas don't mesh together very well. But you have to learn to live with the other person's ideas, and maybe just put up with it, and knowing that you're committed. And you love that person, so you just go with it and live with it, so that you have build a stronger relationship.
Yeah, that's a good. I recall. Like, I've got two degrees in theology. When I was married, I had my wife and I both had degrees in theology. We both had a interest in the theology of marriage, and theology of marriage talks about how the two become one, and in the sacrament of matrimony, the two become one, and that it's a new creation, that you become one flesh with each other and one union with each other. But it didn't occur to me till years and years later, as I'm going through the ups and downs of marriage, how difficult it is for the two people to become one. That you are still two separate people, and with totally different worldviews and totally different backgrounds and totally different upbringings, and long habits and things of that nature. And I realized that, the process of on your wedding day, you don't become one with a snap of a finger. Like, there are things that become one on that day, but it's a growing process. Like, if it's a new creation and it's an infancy in your marriage, like that marriage grows up over time, and you have to grow with it. And the process of learning to be and act as one is a lifelong process and a lifelong learning process.
I always remember at our wedding day, the priest, it was his first wedding, and he said, he gave us a good advice. He said, always keep a smile on your face, because it's not always going to be rosy, but just keep a smile and live with it, and you'll get through it.
If anybody else wants to chime in on the question of what makes marriage difficult, I have a follow-up question. With the topic of this session being, why does marriage matter? Or what makes marriage matter? My follow-up question is, if you were with somebody who was a single friend, somebody who was single, or perhaps they're divorced, or whatever the case may be, and they claim to you that marriage is overrated, and that they challenge you to prove otherwise, that they just don't get the whole idea behind the institution of marriage. They say, I don't need it. It doesn't seem like it has any value to me. As a married person, how would you respond if they say marriage doesn't matter, the institution doesn't matter? I've heard it from several people my age, where they'll say that it's just a certificate. Why do I need a piece of paper to tell me that I'm in love? How would you respond to those who say marriage doesn't matter? A friend who would say that.
I would throw it back at them and ask them, well, then what does matter? Because if marriage doesn't matter, do your kids matter? Does their stability or their upbringing matter? If marriage doesn't matter, does the other person matter, or is it just you that matters? I would throw it back at them and ask them, then what does matter? Because if marriage doesn't matter, then no one else matters either. Just the selfish person that wants everything for himself.
That's what makes marriage difficult.
That's good insight. I like that. What else? Somebody else, what would you say to a friend who says marriage doesn't matter?
You're a dummy.
Why would you say that?
Well, let me go back into the first question. I think it kind of really went wrong when they did away with arranged marriages. At that point, you had two families come together with their own interests at heart. They knew you're the man and the woman. They knew that they were going to strengthen the group and their families and each other's family and their community. They knew they had the best interest of those kids at heart, and did their best to arrange a marriage that would result in a long-lasting bond and something that would be strong and work out. Where nowadays, it's just like you're like a milkweed seed, just poof out in the world, and hopefully you bump into somebody that you're compatible with. Your families may not get along, it may be completely different backgrounds, and that is a real disadvantage from the get-go.
Now, I have a question for Julie at this point. Julie, would your dad have looked at this guy driving or pulling up on his motorcycle outside your house and said, that's the guy I'm arranging for you?
Guaranteed. No, prove me wrong now. Come on.
Julie's
right? Look at
Julie's not saying anything.
Yeah, she's gone silent here.
She's just giggling. I got my answer.
She's completely a male for her bride. You know it.
Oh my goodness.
She's still not saying anything.
I'm not going to either.
We're all waiting for her response. I think honestly though, I think you have a good point in that our society. I don't know that it goes so far as to say let's bring back arranged marriages, but I think that it's true that like the support system that a marriage needs, like the example of a good marriage, the families being supportive of the couple and coming together and welcoming the other into their family and so on and so forth, like that infrastructure has really fallen apart in our society.
Well,
Massively
exactly,
important.
because you look at Hollywood and nobody's married and they're having children outside of marriage and nobody's married and they're shoving it down your throat and they're saying that's acceptable and we're all just supposed to accept that, and they make that look like the norm. And so people are out there thinking, oh, well, maybe I should try this and maybe I should, oh, that just doesn't quite fit. Well, maybe I should try the next one. And there's no importance on marriage because it's a throwaway society anymore. It's like, let's just try it on for size. And if it doesn't work, yeah, we'll just throw that away.
It's ironic, isn't it, that in Hollywood, the very people who portray love stories, because seldom is there a movie that doesn't have a love story in it, because we know that Hollywood knows that we're hardwired to want a love story. So it's like, this is not interesting if it doesn't have some sort of love story in it. So, you know, you can pick a handful of movies that probably off the top of your head that don't, but usually there's some sort of love interest or romance or something in a movie, even in children's movies. But the very people that are portraying these love stories, they have really high percentages of divorce and going from one marriage to the other. And yeah, it's true.
It was just a propaganda mill, and they don't have our best interests at heart.
Yep.
True.
And I do agree with Steve's. When marriages were arranged, we had to learn, or they had to learn, to love one another, right? You just got it. It's what that mom and dad said. So we have to learn to love each other. What has been lost is people don't think that they have to learn to love each other. Like you said, marriage can be difficult. I don't know that it's difficult for Michelle and I. Maybe I can't speak for Michelle. Maybe at the first we had to learn to figure out each other, right? And there were some difficulties at the very first, but at this stage, I don't find marriage difficult. I think one of the differences between an arranged marriage and what we've got now is we don't think we have to learn to love each other anymore. Love is only a feeling instead of a decision, or much more than that. And it might be even harder now because we've got to unlearn what we think love is supposed to be by the movies and really learn to love each other the right way.
Yep. That's really good insight.
I agree, Mark.
I hate to cut off the good discussion, but I do want to say that in the interest of people's time and such, that we're going from 8 o'clock to 9:15, which is 9:15 is about 5 minutes. I also realized that we neglected to pray to start, so I want to make sure to pray to wrap this up. So you know where we're headed in the next 5 weeks. So I hope that you come back and join us for the next study. And Mark, in particular, the next one's for you because it's all about God's plan for marriage and how we participate in that plan. So if you're like, man, I'm really needing more meat in regards to the theology of marriage, that's getting the next 2 sessions get into the God's plan for marriage, and then the last 3 sessions we will talk more about topics of marriage enrichment, like how do you take what God's plan is and then apply it into your own marriage to make it stronger. So that's really where we're going over the course of the next 6 weeks or 5 weeks. And hopefully I'm hoping in doing this, and I was doing it later in the evening at 8 o'clock in the evening. It's a little bit later in hopes that people that might have children or such could put their little ones to bed and make this a date night. So by all means, please join us next week and grab a glass of wine and have a date. I'm really appreciative for those of you who came this evening. And again, if you miss it, we're going to be recording these. So not just the videos, but also the discussion afterwards we're recording so that people can participate, even if they can't do it live. Any other like final thoughts before we wrap up in prayer?
I'm gonna give Steve a call and find out who he's arranging for Tessa.
One of your boys, Mark.
No, hold on here. Tessa's gonna be she's gonna be the Spitfire.
Now, are you all for bringing back the dowry as well?
Yeah, dowry's important.
That's right. Yeah.
I miss all you guys, just saying.
Yeah, it's nice to come back together and have some community and laugh and such. So it also, if you didn't know, on Wednesday mornings we're doing at 9 a.m. so this is tomorrow morning, a study on divine mercy. So if you're able to join us, that's at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then otherwise, I'm waiting on Father John. I know he'll be coming out with the Holy Week schedule. I think we're trying to figure out how to make Holy Week without being present in the church building. These are new and trying times, but I'll say this: I am proud of the church because I can see it nationally and globally of making so many efforts to still be church, even when we're not able to gather for the sacraments and gather for the I'm actually seeing the church make more effort in community and evangelization than I have in a long time, and it's been really beautiful to see. So I don't know if you've seen the same things, but there's a lot of interaction online, people seeking out community, which is good. Anyway, sorry, I'm on my soapbox going with that. I love all things evangelization. Let's close in prayer. I did this last week. I did this with Divine Mercy, where I started to lead a prayer, and then we wrapped up the Hail Mary, and I realized that there's a time delay, so it got really, yeah, like everybody was at a different point in the prayer. So I'm just going to pray on everybody's behalf, and by all means, wrap up with the Hail Mary on your own. But if we tried to do it together, it's just going to sound, it'll be distracting. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, through the intercession of the Holy Family, help us treasure the gift of marriage that reflects the love of Christ for the Church, where the self-giving love of husband and wife unites them more perfectly and cooperates in your plan for new life, created in your image. Help us support men and women in their vocation of marriage, especially in difficult times, when they join their sufferings to the cross. Help us uphold the institution of marriage in our society as the place where love is nurtured and family life begins. Help us acknowledge that our future depends on this love and your providential care for us. We ask all this through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It was great to host you on this platform, and I hope you join us again next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Everett.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, Everett.
Oh, yes.
I think you guys are doing an awesome job with all the online stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're doing the best we can, doing everything that we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.